Hey guys, so let's talk about Stave 3 of A Christmas Carol. So at the end of Stave 2, you have the Ghost of Christmas Past showing Scrooge his former fiancee. He sees her now that that they broke the engagement, or she did, um, because he had changed so much. He the saw her future, saw how she's happy and married, and of course Scrooge at this point just can't take it anymore from all he's seen from his past, and so he basically drives the spirit away in a way, and so the next spirit, when the bell tolls one, nothing happens, and so he sits there for almost 15 minutes wondering what's going on. Then he starts to notice that there's a light coming from the next room and underneath the door. And so he goes over there and opens up the door, and it's basically his room. And he sees that it's hung with living green, so they have all the holly and the wreaths up, and it's beautiful. It's warm. The fireplace is going. It's bright. There's a there's this big guy, a jolly giant is how he's described, sitting on this throne made out of food, of poultry and brawn and apples and you know and bowls of punch and cakes and all these different stuff and turkeys that you might eat at Christmas time. And he's sitting on top of it, and um, he's laughing, and he says, come in and know me better, man. Come in. You've never seen the likes of me before, have you? Okay. So he's much more vocal and outgoing than the Ghost of Christmas Past. He's a giant, and he's got a long green robe on that's trimmed in white. He has a crown on his head. He holds in one hand a torch that looks like the horn of plenty or a cornucopia, and along his midsection he's got a scabbard, which you put your sword in, but there's no sword in it. And that's symbolic, of course, of peace on earth. He's got the scabbard, but it's rusted, and it doesn't really. The sword, the weapon of war, is not actually in it. And so they, talk for a minute, and he talks about how he asked me if he's ever been out, if he's ever walked forth with younger members of my family, meaning my elder brothers born these later years. And he's like, well, no, I don't think I have. Do you have many brothers, Spirit? And he's like, more than 1,800. Okay. He actually has 1,842 because he lives for 24 hours for Christmas. He goes to a Christmas present. So he, takes him out, and they begin to go around the city. He walks out into the city itself, and it's Christmas Day, and people are out shopping and buying and doing all these things, and Scrooge can't believe that these people are out doing all this stuff, and it's a festive environment, and the spirit is enjoying it all, and he's got this the torch, and he shakes it over people and over things to sort of bless it, as he sees good things going on for Christmas Day. And so he says, is there a peculiar flavor you sprinkle from your torch? And he's like, yep, mine own. He says, yep, I do this to bless people. And so Scrooge sees different situations. He goes to Bob Cratchit's house, where he watches his employee have dinner with his family. They seem very, very happy together. This is where we meet Tiny Tim as well, who is Bob's youngest child. He has some sort of disease or handicap that he has to walk with a crutch and an iron frame, leg irons on to keep him straight. And there's a lot of debate about what he actually had. Some people think he probably had rickets, which is a vitamin D deficiency, and considering that he probably didn't drink very much milk and didn't get much sunlight, it's probably pretty close. Some people have said tuberculosis, but rickets probably is, or some kind of a renal problem. That's the problem with your kidneys. The point is, we find out later, of course, that Tim's condition is fixable. You can, it's not permanent. But Tim is happy nonetheless. He's so excited to be with his family. This kid has every reason to be angry at the world, and he's not. And it's exciting because they're having their dinner, and Bob, during the course of the dinner, offers a toast to Ebenezer Scrooge, who's the founder of the feast, because he pays his salary, right? Of course, Mrs. Cratchit's not happy with that. She says, the founder of the feast indeed. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it. And Bob's like, sweetheart, it's Christmas Day. The children are here, and then she just keeps going because she says, he could pay you more basically, but he doesn't. But Bob tries to be nice about the whole thing, and they eventually drink to the health of Scrooge. And of course, that's the one thing that they did that didn't have any heartiness in it. In fact, the mention of his name cast a dark shadow over the family for 5 minutes. But they celebrated together. And the one thing about Tiny Tim is Mrs. Cratchit asks, how he behaved in church, and Bob says, good as gold and better. He gets thoughtful sitting by himself sometimes. He thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped that people in church saw him because he was a cripple, that it might be pleasant for them to remember upon Christmas Day who it was that made lame beggars walk and blind men see. So here's Tim, grateful that the people at church saw him because he's crippled, that they might remember upon Christmas. For Christians, that's a celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ, that it was Jesus who healed people. And Bob gets emotional at that, as you probably would too. And he thinks that Tim's getting better. The thing about it is we know that he's not. He's getting worse, but he thinks he's getting better. They have their meal again. Like I said, they have their pudding, which was a big deal. And Scrooge sees all this. Then he's taken to Fred's house, which is his nephew, and there's a party going on, and he's enjoying it. He hears them play a game of yes and no, which is like 20 questions, and of course the answer is Scrooge. They talk about being is it a horse or a cow or a bull? Does it grunt and growl? Does it walk about the streets freely? Is it kind of mean? Like yes, 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 yes. Like it's your Uncle Scrooge. So they're making fun of him, and he's there the whole time, and Scrooge has to listen to this. And so Fred realizing that we made fun of Scrooge, my uncle, but we need to toast his health. He's given us plenty of merriment, and it would be ungrateful of us not to toast his health, and so they do. But Scrooge sees how happy they are, and it's interesting because he sees what he's missing out on, and of course they wouldn't make fun of him if he wasn't there, but he was also pretty mean, and even Fred talks about how he said Christmas was a humbug, right? And he says, I couldn't hate him if I tried. He's my uncle. I love him, and I'm going to go every year and try to get him to have dinner with us and just try to be his friend. So, kudos to Fred for trying, right? So after that, the spirit takes him out of there and takes him to different places around. I may be a little bit out of order on this, but the most important thing. So he takes him to a place where the miners live and where the French sailors are way out at sea, and there's a guy in a lighthouse, and they're all in situations where you wouldn't think they would celebrate Christmas, but all of those people are. And Scrooge doesn't. He has he probably has a good reason to, has the ability to, but he doesn't. And so he shows him all these people that in situations that are where they're either by themselves or they're way away from family, they're still celebrating the holiday. The last thing that Scrooge sees is he takes him, as he notices these things after Fred's house, because it goes, the Cratchits and then the miners and all that, and then Fred's house, if I believe the order correctly. And the last one, they're standing there, and Scrooge notices that the spirit's gotten older. He's gotten gray. He doesn't look as good as he did. And he says, "Were spirits' lives so short?" And he says, "Yep, mine ends tonight," basically. And then Scrooge notices something sticking out from the bottom of the robe, and he's like, "Is that a foot or a claw? What is that?" He says, "Well, it might well be a claw for all the flesh there is upon it. Look." And he opens his robe up, and there's these two children in there, a boy and a girl, and they are awful. They look sick. They're ragged. They hardly have any clothes on. They're filthy, dirty, clinging to the robe. They look yellow, diseased. And in fact, Dickens says that that man, there's nothing, no monster that half so dread that man has created. That this is the worst thing that has ever been seen. I mean, you think about any horror movie, this is worse than that. To see these children like this. And of course, Scrooge wants to know, are they yours? Are they your spirit? He says they are man's. He says, basically that humans have created these children. He says they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. The boy is ignorance, the girl is want. Beware them both in all their degree, but most of all beware this boy. For upon his brow I see that written which is doom, lest the writing be erased. So ignorance and want. Ignorance meaning you just don't know something, and there's two types of ignorance. There's something you just don't know, and then there's willful ignorance, right? When you just you avoid it because you don't want to know. There's something there that exists, but you just want to avoid it, and that's what the Spirit is talking about. He's talking about how these problems exist, and people just ignore it and act like it's not there. And he's speaking directly, basically, to the people of the city of London, that the English need to be doing more to help these individuals. And Dickens was, going back to his childhood and having experienced what it's like to be, part of the working poor. He understood their plight and he wanted Scrooge to understand what it was like to be in this situation. And he sees Cratchit's house for the first time. He's been his employer for years and never been to his house, so he sees what it's like to work and be poor and barely get by. When he could pay him more, okay. But in this situation, he's talking about ignorance and want being the things that you desperately need in your life. And this little girl represents that. So the worst part is ignorance, that we just ignore it, and that's what Dickens is getting at, and that the Spirit is getting at to Scrooge. And of course, he says, have they no refuge or no resource? He says, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? And of course, the Spirit uses his own words against him, just like he did, and I didn't mention that, when he asked whether Tiny Tim will live. And he says, well, I see an empty seat. I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, He says, no, say he will live. Well, no, if these shadows remain unaltered, the child will die. But what then? If he be like to die, he'd better do it and decrease the surplus population, right? So he uses his words quite a bit. So the Ghost of Christmas Past or Present is pretty interesting because he's a jolly guy, but he's probably the meanest to Scrooge. He uses his own words against him. He hits him right in the heart with these things, showing him ignorance and want, and then and explaining what they represent, and that Scrooge is part of the problem. He has the means to really help and doesn't do it because he's so selfish and so greedy. And he sees these children. I mean, it's hard to see little children who are suffering and sick and dead. So, give me 1 second, please. My phone. Okay, sorry about that phone call. I can't remember where I was now. Oh yeah, the end. So he sees all this with the Ghost of Christmas Present, the end with the ignorance and want, and then he asks for help, and the Spirit won't help him. And as the Spirit just kind of disappears, he looks, and there's something else there, and it's this tall hooded figure in this dark robe, just with the mist all around him, just kind of coming right at him. And that's how the end of that's how Stave 3 ends. So the next spirit just kind of shows up, okay, at the very end, and as the last stroke of 12 ceased to vibrate. So at midnight, that spirit shows up, because at midnight the next day, Present is gone. That's the end of his lifespan. Okay, so that's Stave 3, the Ghost of Christmas Present, and all right.